Hello, everybody, and welcome in to another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. It is Monday, September 23rd, 2024. I'm your host, George Kerth, joined by the one and only Cody Roadcap, taking you right up to a Monday night doubleheader tonight. Cody, how you doing?
Doing good. Not a fan of the doubleheader. Let's get rid of that. But
Honestly,
thanks for being here.
Yeah, no. We're here anyway. And we're in and out of here in less than an hour because that first game starts 7:30 East. Second game 45 minutes later at the normal 8:15 slot. We'll talk about that later in the show, but obviously we have some other things to talk about reacting to week 3. Also, make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at the Couch GMs, and make sure you hit that like, subscribe button, and drop any questions or comments you have in the chat if you're watching live with us. All right, Cody, why don't we just get right into it? Sit back, relax, and chat. All right, really interesting first 3 weeks, but week 3 is what we're focusing in on. I feel like everybody's survivor. I'm just gonna let you
Survivor.
talk. Fools. Survivor picks. Everybody's Survivor picks have been foiled already. I know you had gotten eliminated this week too. Any games you want to spotlight in week 3 just to start the conversation?
All right. Well, there's a ton I want to hit on. So let's start with one that wasn't. You gotta save up for the big games. But let's start with the Carolina Panthers coming out balling against the Las Vegas Raiders. Felt like the trap game. The Raiders coming off the win over the Ravens. Andy Dalton gets the start. We talked about that on last week's show, what that meant. And Andy Dalton becoming the first 300-yard, 3-touchdown passer on the NFL season, just like everybody predicted. Shout out to the Panthers. I don't know what this does for Bryce Young in the long run, this organization in the long run. I don't know if it helps them if they get 5 wins and end up with the 5th draft pick instead of the first draft pick, what that does and what that matters. But shout out to the Panthers getting a win.
I've heard a lot of people talk about how building a winning culture is a big part of, making a then down the line successful franchise. So yeah, even if Andy Dalton isn't your long-term quarterback, I don't think it hurts some of the youth on this team to go out there and be competitive and win games. So maybe that 5-win window, getting that 5th overall pick instead of the 1st overall pick would be good. But it's interesting to see where their quarterback situation's going to go after seeing that. While Bryce Young might not have been the entire problem, there was a huge improvement right off the bat with Andy Dalton.
Yeah, and I'm also interested to see if this is like a legit thing or like a 1-week change. We talk about all the time when coaches are fired or interim head coaches come in, you see that like rush, that 1-week explosion, and then it's kind of back to the same old, same old. So this week is going to be very telling. And I know we're going to talk waivers in a little bit. A guy that probably isn't technically a waiver wire addition, but Deontay Johnson, he balled out this past week. I know Marcus was on board earlier on Monday when he was on the show, but you could still play him. And he definitely did not disappoint. So even though he's probably not available, make sure you're checking because he had 2 really rough weeks and he could have been a casualty that, made it off a team and could be in the waiver pool this week.
It's true. I know I actually added him in a league that I had an extra bench spot last week just because of players going on IR everywhere. So yeah, take a look, see if he was dropped. That's great advice there, Cody. Another sudden quarterback change leading to a big change on the team. The Seahawks dominated the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins could get nothing going on offense. The 3 points they did score were off of a Seattle turnover. I didn't watch the game super closely. I'm not even sure if they crossed the 50 as an offense besides that turnover. It was bad. Are you worried even more now about Waddle and Hill after seeing that performance?
Worried more? No. Worried, yes. Like we saw Skylar Thompson come in the playoffs. We've seen it before. Like without Tua, this team comes to a halt. And as someone that has a lot of stock in Devon Achane, I mean, he still got his volume touches. It just wasn't what you're used to. Tyreek Hill, I mean, 6.5 points or whatever he finished with around there is not great. And then Jalen Waddle, like he just wasn't involved either. So it's definitely going to be a learning curve. I know Skylar Thompson got hurt in the middle of the game and Tim Boyle had to play for a little bit. They did sign Tyler Huntley last week. Maybe he gets involved. But I think at some point they're going to have to start looking at a veteran. And I think Ryan Tannehill returning to Miami would be a heck of a lot of fun, whether it works out or not. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Ryan Tannehill is going to save the season. We saw how rough he looked last year in Tennessee. There's a reason he's still a free agent in week 3 of the season. But, they got to do something, get somebody in there that can play in rhythm, play in this system, because it is going to be a rough season for the Miami Dolphins.
Especially because this team's considered a competitor. Like, you kind of don't want to waste a season in the window not going out there and doing what you can to get this team a competent quarterback and having yourself a backup when Tua does come back, because it definitely sounds like Tua's going to be coming back at some point. I don't know if that's the right move or the wrong move, or if it's even actually going to happen, but that's their intention. So having that insurance policy in case something goes wrong for a team that wants to compete for a championship, I think Tannehill's a no-brainer there. But I know there's a little bit of a caution after how that last time ended, and maybe even Tannehill doesn't want to go back there. But I would find it hard to believe a guy sitting on the couch looking for an opportunity wouldn't want to go to a team with those kind of weapons around him that has a chance.
Yeah, the only thing I could think of for him is I know Diana Rossini, who's been close to Tannehill covering him back in Tennessee, has said that he's also waited for an opportunity where he can start and he can play. And maybe the Dolphins' next 3 weeks isn't enough for him to consider wanting to play. He might still be waiting out for another unfortunate injury that could give him starting role the rest of the season, a la a Joe Flacco last year. Like Joe Flacco wasn't even on a team until halfway through the season, then ended up, being the Browns' season savior, playoff quarterback, and is now has a backup job with the Indianapolis Colts. But yeah, I think that was an interesting game here. We do got a quick question from Andrew, since we're talking week 3. Hit that one real quick. Some matchups. So he asked, which was the more telling performance for the team's future this season? Carolina beating Las Vegas, the New Orleans losing to Philly after dominating the first 2 weeks, or Dallas playing below average? We talked a little bit about Carolina, but we did skim over the impact that meant on the Raiders. So if you want to talk about that, or we were going to get to Philly at some point. So I know you have a lot to get off your chest.
I still think Vegas is a very up and down team that hasn't quite figured it out. I do think that there is a way out with the talent they have on the offense. I think it's also very telling that 1 week after beating the Ravens, they get destroyed by the Panthers, and then all of a sudden Antonio Pierce comes out and says, I'm not ruling out a quarterback change. That's exactly what's holding the Raiders back. And I mean, I love Gardner Minshew, and he's definitely a top 20, 25 at the worst quarterback, but he's not doing them really any favors either right now, which is a big reason why they can't just get that rhythm. And this team's ceiling's going to be limited until then. So I think that this performance, especially this 2 weeks, if you just take this 2 weeks, you're going to stretch this out through the rest of the year. This is going to be the Raiders. They're going to win games they're not supposed to, and then they're going to lose games ugly. And that's what's holding them back.
Yeah, and I think when we did our prediction show too, I was like, I think the Raiders could potentially be in that playoff mix for that 7 seed, or they could, struggle all season. I think they'll bounce back. Without looking at the schedule ahead of me, I don't know where they're going next week. Could they have fell victim to a little bit of a trap game early in the season coming off the Raiders? Do they have a division opponent next week and kind of
It's
overlook the Panther?
Cleveland.
Well, let's see. That's another team that's reeling. So if they have 2 back-to-back flops, then there's definitely some concern with the Raiders going there. And then Dallas, I'll let you talk about the Eagles. So I'll talk about Dallas real quick.
Okay.
And I didn't think they were going to be very good to start the season. I anticipated them not making the playoffs. My bold prediction was that Mike McCarthy was going to get let go in the middle of the season. And they just continue to struggle. And honestly, they made it a game, which they should not have. The Ravens almost fumbled another fourth quarter, which is something that is concerning as they move forward going against other teams. But yeah, the Cowboys, they can't stop the run. They need their playmakers. They need one extra piece outside of, like, people have figured it out. It's CeeDee Lamb, and that's pretty much it. They need Tolbert to step up. They need Brandon Cooks to regain form, or they need Jake Ferguson to get healthy. And with the lack of a running game, I know I can never pronounce his name, Rico Dottle. He had an okay game against the Ravens, but they're still missing a couple pieces. And you're starting to see the lack of an offseason really start to show up for this team. But don't forget, I will say the one thing I will say is Dak Prescott started off really slow to begin last year in September, and we're still only in September. It's a long season to make absolutes. And by the end of the season, he was potential MVP candidate. So he has shown in the past he can turn it around, but I'm not loving the chances of that happening for the Dallas Cowboys.
I didn't like that even after they showed some, promise in the fourth quarter of that game, almost making a ridiculous comeback. Micah Parsons came out in the locker room and made it sound like he was very upset with the defense, except for DeMarcus Lawrence, and was like, nah, like no one played besides me and him, and I was gonna stop making plays until someone else made a play. Like the comment was almost like that. I was like, I don't know. It sounds like there's tensions on top
And
of the
it is a
fact
new
that they're just
defense, too.
struggling.
Like, people forget Dan Quinn left,
Mhm.
and I think they have Mike Zimmer now as their defensive coordinator. So it is a change. It is a new defense and a little bit new style system. So there are growing pains, and we'll have to wait and see if this turns around. I do think Mike McCarthy is a very good head coach, and he could turn this around, but Jerry Jones might get in the way.
And that's been the story of Dallas as a whole over the last 25 plus years. I think the question with the New Orleans Philly game was spinning more towards New Orleans. How real are they after they then just completely flopped from putting 47, 44 points on the board and then dropped 12 against Philly? I think part of it's a testament to Philly coming out and rebounding after an ugly loss. Like their defense looked like it was playing with a purpose. But I think it also shows that New Orleans was maybe not a one-trick pony, but a two-trick pony. They were Rashid Shaheed on the deep ball and Alvin Kamara playing out of his mind. Once Philly committed to stopping Alvin Kamara, all they had was Rashid Shaheed. And there were, I think, 2 plays where he had a chance at a deep ball and Carr just barely missed him. If he makes one of those plays, the Saints win. But they didn't. That's a difficult way to play when you're basically relying on a 40-yard bomb or your running back going off. So like the Saints team, they're going to be solid. They're going to be great. But I think they were overperforming for sure over the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. And I do think, George, I do have to call you out a little bit for being the most Philly fan of all Philly fans, acting like the world was ending when it was 3-0, and you guys, there's no way the Eagle. You should have saw our group chat, folks. I thought you would have thought this team was losing by 30. They were losing by 3, and then they come back and win. But yeah, I think the Eagles, they're going through some stuff too, trying to figure out their identity, which is not uncommon for a new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator, just trying to figure it out. And I think they'll eventually find their groove. But I do think, to not as much of an extent as the Raiders and Gardner Minshew, but you have seen some of the limitations of Jalen Hurts. Yes, he can make big plays with his legs and stuff like that, but he'll give you an interceptable ball here and there. He'll cause some turnover-worthy plays. He'll fumble a little bit. Like, you just get more splash plays from him. But I think that could be something that could hold him back. But he showed again in the clutch moments, he's going to show up.
Exactly. And I think a lot of my frustration came from the very interesting decisions to either go for it on 4th downs that were 4th and 4, 4th and 5, either on your own side of the 50 or right on the 50, or the amount of times they didn't just take points. And it seems like they're just doubling down. Like, this is just who they are. If you're a fantasy owner of Jake Elliott, drop him, because they're not kicking field goals. They're never going to kick field goals. It just seems like that's the case. Unless you knock them back in 4th and 16, maybe. But it's just they are going to go pedal to the metal. He is going full Dan Campbell. We are going to go for the touchdown every single drive. And like that could work. And maybe it will work if the Philly offense starts rolling and they start being able to pick up some of those 4th and shorts and, not turn the ball over as much in the red zone. It could end up being a very dangerous offense if you're giving the offense 4 downs every single set of downs instead of 3. But right now, with how they are struggling and still trying to learn this new system, it's been really ugly.
And they're missing their best wide receiver.
And 2 at the end of that game, because Devontae Smith left with a concussion as well. So also, yeah, then again, props to Jalen Hurts for being able to lead a game-winning touchdown drive without AJ Brown and Devontae Smith.
So we're picking up Covey this week is what you're saying.
Negative.
Okay.
We are playing Dallas Goedert everywhere, apparently.
Gotcha. All right. So I want to hit a couple more quick games, then we can kind of put this week to rest. One, got to give a shout out to Malik Willis going back to Tennessee and beating up on the Tennessee Titans. He had a really good day, some crucial third downs, over 200 yards passing, no turnovers. And Will Levis continues to just fumble and throw picks. And that is something to monitor in Tennessee as well. Like, I know this season's all about evaluating Will Levis, but at some point, like, if Bryce Young can get benched, you got to think Will Levis's leash is getting shorter and shorter after another multi-turnover week, as he already leads the league in turnovers and giveaways.
Definitely.
All right, my last game that we can talk about, that I think we'll spend the most time on, Rams 49ers. And this just goes to show why we love the NFL.
And divisional games specifically.
Divisional games. There is not a person in the world that thought the Rams were going to go into home, which is never a home game for them, even though it says Rams house all over the stadium. With no Cooper Kupp, no Puka Nacua, down 3 offensive linemen, and beat, albeit the banged up San Francisco 49ers, which, breaking news, Javon Hargrave tore his Achilles, so they are lost another piece on the defensive side. So the 49ers continue to get banged up. But now the 49ers are 1-2, struggling, and gave up a huge comeback against the Rams. Are you concerned at all about the 49ers?
No. And the biggest reason is because they went through a stretch like this when they had a lot of people out last year too. And they lost, I think it was 2 or 3 straight. It might have been 3 straight. In the middle part of last season too. And I think a big part of it is no Deebo Samuel. Like, you can talk about how important George Kittle is to this offense. He's very important. And Christian McCaffrey, who hasn't played yet this year. And Brandon Ayuk, who has played but hasn't really showed out so far. Deebo Samuel is what makes this offense run. I really think so. And they've lost. Their record without him is really not good. And now you're looking at it, they're down him and Kittle, and they start off this game hot, and then all of a sudden in the second half, they just can't move the ball. And the Rams come back and win. I wouldn't be shocked if until he comes back, you might see another loss or two. Like, they're still going to be fine. I still think that they're the best team in that division. They should make up some games in the second half of the season, win the division, make a playoff run. But they're not going to go out there and only lose 2 games this season, especially with how banged up they are right now. But just wait until all the cavalry comes back from the injured list, because they're going to be fine.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's just I think they're going to be fine too. But, Seattle's playing good right now, although you could say who have they played, and I completely understand that. When you get to play the Dolphins without Tua, the Broncos, and the Patriots. Like, I completely get why you think, they might be overrated at 3-0. But they're playing good. They always play the 49ers tough. And it's how long do these injuries, like, if they start to spiral and the injuries get out of control, this team that had high Super Bowl hopes ends up as, 6 or 7 seed early, make the playoffs, might have to fight for it, not get that home field. Be interesting to see. But again, we're still in September. There's a lot of season left. And the 49ers should be fine. And hopefully those pieces come back, not just for the NFL, but for our fantasy lineups. So 2 players for fantasy-wise that are banged up now. And it's not Britton Covey, which Andrew is letting us know that he has an injury that I did not hear about. Did you hear about it?
Probably, but don't remember it. Shows how much stock I put in Britton Covey, unfortunately.
Yeah. But the 2 names that we have to talk about is at the tight end position, because the tight end position is yet again very underwhelming. But Sam Laporta left the game, carted off. Sounds like it's a low ankle sprain. Looks like they dodged a bullet there on a long-term injury. And then Trey McBride also got banged up in that Cardinals-Lions game. So 2 tight ends out this week, most likely, and could be, and we'll talk again on Thursday if they're actually going to be out. But a tough blow to the tight end, because they were 2 of the higher drafted ones, and I had really high hopes for Trey McBride and Sam Laporta coming into the season.
Exactly. But now the entire tight end list of top tight ends is either dealing with something or struggling. It's absolutely crazy.
Or their name's Kyle Pitts.
Unfortunately, you're pretty much right. Now, it's at this point, it's what? It's Kyle Pitts, it's Brock Bowers. Dallas Goedert finally was able to catch a ball this week, but that 1 week performance basically puts him in the top 3. Like, there's just not a lot out there. So while it's like, yeah, we're sitting here dealing with injuries to Laporta, McBride, Kittle, and Njoku, and it goes on and on and on. Like, no one else is scoring points either. If you can happen to get lucky and find the person that goes off that week out of the bucket, off the waiver wire, whatever, you're sitting good. If you end up getting 2 points from your tight end, 9 times out of 10, it's not going to hurt you in fantasy, which is the other way to look at it of like, it stinks we're kind of sitting there playing somebody who's just not performing in our lineup because we have to by position restraints. Everyone else is getting nothing too.
So just so you know, Dallas Goedert, half point PPR, tight end 1.
From 1 week, because he really didn't do much of anything the other 2 weeks. He got a couple catches, but nothing crazy.
Also 32.4 half point PPR points through 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So just over 10 a week average is currently the leader. Travis Kelce, tight end 22.
Has he broken 5 yet?
I think he had 5 this past week, but he is averaging 3.7.
That's
Very
crazy.
low.
So yeah, tight end top 5, Goddard, Brock Bowers, who we talked a lot about, last week when we had that trade come up in our chat. Cole Kmet, who's also just coming off of 1 week this past week. He had 20 in half PPR scoring. Isaiah Likely, who had 1 week, that was week 1. And Trey McBride, who is now dealing with a concussion. This is a great world we live in for tight ends.
Well, and I think we're just kind of seeing that too at the wide receiver position. I know there was a lot of hype going into the season. 5 wide receivers in the top 6 in most leagues, top 7 maybe. Through 3 weeks, Juwan Jennings, current wide receiver 1, obviously his 40-point week this past week has helped. But they have some people are, I guess Malik Neighbors is half point PPR, wide receiver 1. But Juwan Jennings is sitting at 2. Then Chris Godwin, Rashee Rice. Like the wide receivers have been, not what we expected. CeeDee Lamb's all the way down at 17. Justin Jefferson's up at 5. Don't even know where Jamar Chase is. He's way too low for where he was drafted. Tyreek Hill now without Tua.
It's worth noting we're talking about this before the Monday night game if you're listening to us in your
That's a
podcast
valid
feed.
point too.
So he still has 1 game in hand on a lot of these guys.
For sure. That's a good point.
But to build on that, so much wide receiver hype, the biggest wide receiver fantasy draft in years. And now through most of 3 weeks, obviously still counting out the Monday night games, of the top 25 flex players, I'm counting this as running back, wide receiver, tight end. 15 of them are running backs and only 10 are wide receivers. And of course, wide receiver 1, Juwan Jennings, basically on the back of 1 week. Are running backs taking over fantasy again?
No. Running backs
Is it just like a tier thing then? Like this top 15 running backs is just significantly better than the next 15?
No, I think this is a little bit of stat plucking early.
Okay.
Let's reevaluate this midway point, end of the season. I think these wide receivers are going to start to, let's be honest. The NFL scoring is down. All of it's down. There's been 1 300-yard passer, maybe 2. Sam Darnold's the only 300-yard, or not Sam Darnold, Andy Dalton. Only 300-yard, 3 touchdown passer on the season, barring anything happening late on Monday night. But yeah, I think the running backs are interesting, but I think wide receivers will turn it around too. And I think we also realize that running back position is they kind of go in opposite direction. Running backs start out hot, they start to get banged up, their scoring potential goes down. Wide receivers kind of start out slow as the season gets on. They start to pick up. Unless your name's Derrick Henry, who gets better in December at the running back position, I think you'll see some running backs tail off here at the end.
I mean, you can say running backs don't do tail off at the end, but then there's also those running backs that tend to do better near the end of the season. I mean, obviously, when you think about it, the first person I'm thinking of is Derrick Henry, who I think is running back 4 or 5 so
Which
far this season.
I said,
But
so thanks for listening. I literally said the same thing.
okay,
I said if your name was not Derrick Henry.
got it. But that's he's not alone either, though. There's a lot of running backs we saw trying to lead teams near the end of the season last year. Brees Hall had a very good second half of the season. Devon Achane had a good second. Like, it's not necessarily a given that you're going to sit out here and say these top running backs are starting off super hot, but then like in the fantasy playoffs, it's not a guarantee they're not going. Like, they may not be there, but the wide receivers are going to. I think maybe I'm overreacting on saying that the running backs are coming back in and dominating, and the wide receivers just aren't as important. But I think it's a lot more even maybe than we thought it was coming into the fantasy season.
I mean, I guess it determines how you define even. Are you just saying because 5 picks went in the first? But like if you balance it out in the first 2 rounds, like it was pretty 50-50 split on running backs, wide receivers. So where does maybe that's kind of our disconnect here is if you're saying at the top versus the whole picture, and I know your thing was the top 25 players for now too. And I just think there's a lot of, you know, stuff that's been going on and, splits and all that good stuff. Like J.K. Dobbins, he had some really good weeks. He's sitting in the top 25. Is he going to tail off? You have Jordan Mason sitting in your top 25, but how does he look when CMC comes back? Like, I think some of those wide receivers that are, maybe that's the better way to put it is I think the wide receivers that are there will still be there at the end, even if the split's not the same, or, maybe the running backs still favorite, but the running backs that are there, that's going to have more movement than the wide receivers, except for Juwan Jennings. Once those people come back, he will not be sitting as player 6 in terms of flex positions.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, I'm thinking when it comes to maybe if I narrow it down to top 10, and if you look at top 10, I think it's a little bit more even, but there's a lot more running backs than were taken in the top 10 right now. That might even out as we go through the season. And there's been a lot of excuses for those top wide receivers so far. Chase having a limited week, and Cup. I shouldn't say Cup. It was Nakua who's now out with injury. He was the borderline first round pick. Injuries so far, I think, also have affected wide receivers more than running backs.
Yeah, and again, it is September, and we're starting to see more and more this is like the preseason month. It just takes some time for these teams to find their groove and move on. But one guy I do want to highlight, and this might just be on me, Malik Neighbors balling out, saving
Yeah.
Danny Dimes' career in New York, maybe at least for a season. Definitely an overlook on my end in terms of what I thought his value would be year one redraft. I don't have any shares of him. I was not bought into him. I understood the fantasy value or the dynasty, but he was, because he's an elite player and you just hope for a better quarterback. But what he's done the last couple of weeks, making heck of a bunch of catches, wanted to give him a shout out and basically say, I'm sorry for not thinking that you had value as a rookie. And you were definitely disproving me on that.
Well, and you actually were one of the first people to come out and say that, because there was still not a ton of hype on him last week, despite him breaking out, because he was overshadowed by Marvin Harrison, like you mentioned. Now, obviously, Marvin Harrison came back to earth. He still had a decent week, but now 2 straight solid weeks from Malik Neighbors has him as wide receiver 1, and he is in the benefit of, even though he's on a bad offense, he is the player on a bad offense. So yeah, we're looking at one of those guys that's going to end up being a diamond in the rough more than likely, and good call out on him.
Alrighty. So let's jump into some waivers at this point. I did see Andrew put in the chat that Britton Covey, which we've talked way too much about him, has a broken shoulder. He's out 6 weeks. So that's his injury. George does not care at all. He's like, just stop talking about him. But let's talk about waiver wire people. The big name that everyone's going to go after this week is Juwan Jennings. 40 points in week 3. Still pretty much available everywhere. Are you going up? Are you going to go spend the fab for him? Or do you have your hesitations?
I'm not spending the fab for him because I don't think it's a long-term solution. And it's because we've seen this before. This story has played out multiple years where Debo or Ayuk get hurt. Juwan Jennings plays a solid game. This is obviously the best game he's played in his career. And like you and I were talking about before the show, if you did happen to have him sitting on the bench and you're looking at that 40 something points, it hurts because more than likely that's not happening again. But I'm not saying you shouldn't go out there and put a waiver claim on him or put it like maybe $5-10 a fab on him if you're a needy team right now, because I think he's going to be good until Debo and Kittle are back. So there's still value there, but people are 100% going to overspend, and don't be one of the people that goes out there and overspends for a guy that's going to be a wide receiver 3 in probably 3 weeks.
That's a good way to put it. Another breaking news: Derwin James did get suspended for 1 game for some taking into account player safety. I couldn't read the whole tweet as I was trying to pay attention to what you were saying because you were making good points. But he suspended 1 game for, I guess, for some hits or the way he played on Sunday. So that's something to keep an eye on. But I'm with you. I'm not spending the fab on Juwan Jennings. I didn't go get him last week or before the game started and all these people were out. Yes, he had that 40-point game. And he might have another good game this upcoming week or the following week, and I get that. But I'm not going to spend my fab and waste it. If you're a waiver system and you need to know and you want to get him with your top waiver, so be it. But I'm going to give you one other name, 49ers wide receiver to consider. I'm not saying you would pick him up necessarily this week. You could, but their first round pick, Ricky Pearsall, will most likely be back here in the next week or two. I think he'll miss week 4 for
He'll
sure.
have to miss next week.
Yep, because he's on the list he's on. But then after that, first round pick, a guy that they had high hopes on, sounded like he didn't even want to go on the list. He wanted to come back and play sooner. So it sounds like he's making good recovery. Everyone's going to be going after Juwan Jennings this week, and I get that. But it might be time to start looking at Ricky Pearsall, especially if you can put NFI players on your IR spots. I think that is a fun name to watch. I got a question. If you want to do a question before we get into the next waivers.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So Camden said he got Stroud, Jaden Daniels, Gibbs, Ramondre, Etienne, Akers, Chase, Nico Collins, Waddle, Cooper, and McBride. 1 to 2. Do I hold or panic?
1-2 record.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, that's a pretty good lineup.
Hold or panic. I wouldn't panic.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
I mean, there's
either.
some things that you have to look at, aka tight end position, that you're not going to find an answer for, and that's totally fine because no one is. But no, you've got solid starters at pretty much every position there that I'm seeing.
No, I'm definitely with you. I'm not panicking on that one. Maybe you try to. We talk about this in fantasy, trying to improve your team on the margin. So some of the Ramondre, that was the meme of the week. His 0.3 points. I understand why that one sucks. He has no trade value right now, so you're not going to be able to move him. Cam Akers, I like that addition, adding to him. Jamar Chase, he's definitely going to, I'm assuming that's Jamar Chase. If that's Chase Brown, you can cut him. But if it's Jamar Chase, you can keep him for sure. And then Amari Cooper. And then McBride, I don't think his injury is that long of a deal. Maybe if Jaden Daniels has a really good game tonight, I know I'm recording this before maybe you try to flip him or move some pieces around. But with Stroud, Gibbs in there, and Etienne, Chase, and Nico Collins, yeah, Waddle, Cooper, Ramondre, there's definitely some question marks. Maybe you try to improve on the waiver wire system or do a 2-for-1 kind of deal. But definitely don't panic and don't do something crazy like trade all those pieces away. I think you got a good team, and I think you'll be in it for the long run.
Yeah, I think a big thing is if you're trying to find an upgrade, try to find an upgrade at flex. Try to flip a 2-for-1 for a better flex, so you don't have to worry about trying to go with Ramondre or the inconsistent Cooper or Waddle with the weird quarterback situation right now. Yeah.
And he followed up. So he does have Ferguson on the bench, so he's not worried about tight end there.
Yeah, you're fine.
Just looking where to upgrade. And I think it's your wide receiver 2 flex, or not wide receiver, running back 2 flex options with Etienne is borderline there. I think you're okay with him, but the Ramondre one definitely stinks. And you're going to get that with a poor Patriots team, but he has gotten volume. He has gotten work. And I know Antonio Gibson is picking up there. So he would be the one guy I would consider moving, but you might have to hold him a couple more weeks. I wouldn't cut him outright just because he had a bad week. I think I would hold, if I can throw him in as a piece for a deal, like if you could move somebody, one of those wide receivers, maybe a Cooper and a Stevenson for someone a little bit more solid or safer, or maybe even a little bit more higher end potential, even if they have some bustability, that would be the kind of moves I'd be looking to make if I was running your team.
I want to use the word bustability more often. It sounds like a good time.
It sounded great coming off the tongue. Let me just say. But let's get back to waivers. Let's talk some running backs. Carson Steele, what are your thoughts of him on the Sunday night game? Is he worth adding? Bucky Irving, Todd Bowles came out and said that he's going to get more playing time as we go up. We've talked about him before. Any of those guys ring a bell for you?
I like going out there and getting Bucky Irving, thinking that it's a long-term play of he's outperforming White on the ground. White's going to get a lot of the passing game work, so there's going to be a limit, but I'd almost rather have the guy who's going to get the carries inside the 5, and that's looking more and more like it's going to be Bucky Irving down the stretch. Like it's starting to trend that direction. And Carson Steele, shorter term play. Obviously, Pacheco is going to be out for a while, but he's going to be back by the time the fantasy playoffs come around. He might be a guy who's going to get enough volume to help you through bye weeks, but he wasn't the most impressive. I think there's just a lot of hype around him because of his story and whatever else, and the fact that he's on Kansas City. But he's like a solid player who's getting volume, so he's at least worth a roster spot and could be a potential flex to fill buys.
Yeah, and I think if you're going to play the long-term game, I would also look into maybe like a Kareem Hunt now that he's back to see what he might do. He just got there, which is why he wasn't called up from the practice squad. Might be another week or so, but if you want to get ahead of that spending, only spend $2 instead of $22 after it's a big week in Fab. That's something to look at. Let's talk about wide receivers. The name I want to mention is Quentin Johnson. He had another good week this week as well. And also that ties us into Andrew talking about the Couch GMs World Cup, which he's a part of, which we're going to start bringing back some more updates about that as we are in week 3 of that. But it looks like if he would have started Goddard along with Quentin Johnson and Dak Prescott, he could have had the highest scoring in all of Group B this week. So Group B doesn't have Quentin Johnson available, and that's the best group. So make sure you go out and get him.
All right, Cody, out here talking trash on groups A and C, but that just makes it harder on you to try to win. So I'm actually okay with that being the hardest group.
I shouldn't speak, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to be number 1 after this week. But
okay, I see. But yeah, no, I like Quentin Johnston and how he's kind of breaking out in that Chargers offense. That Chargers offense has a lot of room to grow. There's a lot of new pieces. There's obviously a new head coach, new offensive system. Struggled a little bit this week, but I was a big fan of Ladd McConkey after the first week. He's still seeing some targets, but I think he's kind of fallen to number 2 behind Quentin Johnston, who is finally showing the potential that they thought they had last year. And he just started off so slow last year.
yeah, and maybe that's a good reminder to not over the NFL is not fantasy football. It's not Madden. Like, give your rookies at least 3 years to see if they're going to do something. Same could be said about Bryce Young and the Panthers. Like, maybe they might have jumped it. Like, if he tries a Sam Darnold revengeance or a Geno Smith revengeance, I don't think anybody would be surprised. You got to give rookies some time. Do you want to talk about the Demarcus Robinson, Tutu Atwell debate?
I do, because it's interesting how when you look at the stat lines, Demarcus Robinson, 1 catch for 32 yards. I still want to say he's the safest option in that offense, but maybe that's a problem when it comes to the fact that he might get the most attention from a lot of defenses while they're without Kupp and while they're without Nakua. The person I brought up last week as a sleeper, because at the beginning of the season, when they were missing Kupp last year, it was Tutu Atwell's show. At the end of the season, when Kupp was out, it was Demarcus Robinson's show. Both of them have shown that they can, perform in this offense. Atwell led the Rams in receptions with 4 and yards with 93 last week. I think both of them are worth ads if they're sitting out there. There's a good chance if one of them's been snatched up so far, it's Demarcus Robinson, because that's where a lot of people were thinking it was going to go. Atwell might be worth a start matchup based while there's injuries here as well, because Stafford's shown rapport with him and he had a pretty solid week.
For sure. I'm out on both of them. Like I think it's be so hard to predict which one any of the Rams wide receivers. Like if I had to play one, I'm with you. I think DeMarcus is the safer one. And I say safer as, lightly as possible. But I think it is going to be so hit or miss on which guy gets the targets, which guy gets the starts. You're going to have it's almost like Rashid Shaheed. They just none of them had the big games yet, but it's like, do they get the touchdown? Do they get the big play? Like, what does that mean for? And I think that's kind of the value there. And you might need that as we have waivers and bye week starting next week. So that is something worth noting. But I like those guys.
The answer in the Rams offense is Kyron Williams, who's just going to get fed the rock over and over and over again.
That's a great
That's
point.
just a guaranteed fact at this point.
For sure. You have Tyler Conklin on the list as a tight end because, tight ends are, yeah.
They're fantastic. We're gonna chase points here, and he's gonna get 2 points next week, and that's exactly what's gonna happen. But at the tight end position, it's hard to not chase points because number one, there's nobody scoring, and number two, you can never predict where the points are coming from next. So when you have a guy with Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball, and Rodgers almost looked like vintage Rodgers last week on Thursday night, you're gonna go out there and take him and hope that connection keeps building.
For sure. And, maybe in the year of tight ends are so volatile, Hunter Henry, get your 5 points and move on.
When you say that, I played him on Thursday. He got 1.9. I wasn't really mad because my opponent played a tight end who got 2. But he's somebody who might just stay in my lineup at this point unless I see a better out, because he's going to get targets probably 3 out of 4 weeks.
Speaking of tight ends, just occurred to me because I saw it on Twitter earlier, but I had this thought. Is Taysom Hill that important to the Saints offense that when he's out, they just can't score?
It's possible. Are those wildcat plays? In most cases, those wildcat plays kind of bring an offense out of rhythm. But maybe in this case, it helps. Just make defenses think about something else. Adds a wrinkle. Also, I think I'm more and more on the case of when he's playing with tight ends being so volatile, he's in your lineup just because he gets the ball, whether it's passing it, running it, receiving. Like, he's become important, even though he's going to be super volatile, because he's actually got a better ceiling than 95% of tight ends in the league right now.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation here. I know we're getting closer to Monday night kickoff, so let's talk streaming defenses before we preview these games. You have Titans versus Dolphins. Play them both, and man, you
Am I
probably
wrong?
right. So which one do you like better?
With how bad the turnovers have been by Will Levis, it's probably the Dolphins right now. And I honestly can't even tell you. I didn't even check what the actual own percentages were of either of these defenses. I'm sure the Titans defense isn't super owned unless people kind of stashed them last week because they were playing against Malik Willis. But either one that's available, I think it's worth a play. If you told me this game ended 6-3, I'd say, yep, exactly. And if they happen to score points, that's one of those that it's like, I was wrong. They got me. But it's either mass turnovers and bad ones on one side or a quarterback who couldn't stay upright on the other side. Perfect situation for fantasy defenses.
I'm with you. I would pick the Dolphins over there. You have a couple can you drops on our list here. And I think they're all drops. So I'm going to try to get some more difficult ones for our Thursday show of like, is it too early to panic or whatnot? But you got Zeke Elliott, Lad McConkey, which you talked about a little bit, and Jahan Dotson. I think they're all droppable. Want to get your take if there's any that aren't because you put them on the list.
No, I think the only one I'm questioning is McConkey, just in case you do start to see the rookie kind of come into form. But because we have Quentin Johnston on the list, and I think he's kind of breaking out as number one, not an offense at this point, especially with Herbert beat up, that can sustain 2 fantasy wide receivers. They're at this point sustaining Quentin Johnston and the run game, which is mostly J.K. Dobbins at this point. So I think he's droppable, but he's somebody I'm kind of keeping in the corner of my eye.
All right. And before we preview these games, our friend Camden came back with a trade offer that he sent. So if you remember him with the team we talked about a little bit ago. So he sent this trade offer. I think it's a good trade, but I want to get your thoughts. So he was going to, the guy has Bijan. So he's going to send Daniels, Ramondre, Ferguson, and Cooper. So 4 people for Herbert, Jacobs, and Knox. For him, will essentially be replacing Jacobs for Ramondre. And I do think this is a great example. I like this trade, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And it might not work because the guy would then have to drop 2 players, or 1 player in addition to. So, but throwing people at somebody and targeting one guy specifically, because then it will give you some negotiation power. If he's like, "Hey, can we do this?" But if you focus on Josh Jacobs and then add pieces around that, I really like that trade, and I love to know if that does end up going through. But George, what is your thoughts?
I like it because the way I'm looking at it is you're sacrificing a backup quarterback, Jaden Daniels. You're getting back Herbert, who, I mean, hopefully by the time you would need him for a Stroud bye week, he'll be fine. You're sacrificing your backup tight end, which at this point is not really of any value. And you're basically, like he said, he's trading Ramondre, and I'll throw in Amari Cooper for Josh Jacobs. And I think Josh Jacobs is a great upgrade for your flex spot or your running back 2 when you're getting rid of Ramondre Stevenson, who's highly volatile, and Amari Cooper, who is maybe even more volatile. So I love that deal. And you're also adding that, value of making the guy be like, I'm getting Jaden Daniels and Jake Ferguson too. That kind of thing is great to throw out for a trade because you're making it look like a better trade than it might even be.
Definitely. Ooh, voice crack. Yeah, I really like that one. Let us know next week or on Thursday if that trade goes through. And as always, thanks for joining in the live chat as we do the show. George, we are about 15 minutes away from the first kickoff game, which is the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Buffalo Bills, the Gabe Davis revenge game. And I was hoping for more than just like a smirk. Like I thought that would get you a good chuckle out of you. Couldn't get anything.
I mean, nothing with the Jaguars is exciting me at the moment, so that might be part of it. I have inactives up. I was actually prepared this time. If you would like me to just take a quick look on the air here.
For sure.
Taron Johnson's still out for Buffalo. They're also without Mike Edwards. So a couple of injured players in the secondary for Buffalo. Jacksonville, obviously the big one, Evan Ingram, is inactive right now. If you're still in need of a tight end, you're trying to play Ingram, good luck out there trying to find somebody.
I'm playing his
They're also
backup,
without Darnell
whatever
Savage.
his name is.
What was that?
I'm playing as Strange, whoever it is, whoever
Brenton
that is.
Strange, exactly. And I mean, you're just hoping for a couple of catches just to see what you can get. And they're also without Darnell Savage in their secondary. That's the names that I'm seeing on here that look like they're important pieces. Obviously, a couple weeks in, you're going to see a couple of pieces out. But I think the big one on what we focus on, Evan Ingram, Gabe Davis revenge game is something that honestly didn't even cross my mind as this came up. It was more just like, can Jacksonville move the ball on a consistent basis?
Yeah, look, I know I was talking about the can you drop things. Christian Kirk goes one more game with like 1 target, 1 catch. He's on the can you drop list that you'll be asked about next week, which is kind of crazy because, without Evan Ingram, you'd think he'd be the key guy like he was 2 years ago before Calvin Ridley got there, and yet he can't get involved. Gabe Davis is been struggling. I mean, this whole Jaguars offense has been struggling, and I'm just really interested to see how this game plays out for Buffalo. Is this another Josh Allen hero MVP performance type where he just does everything, get you 1 through the air, 1 through the ground? For me, I think, Jacksonville +5, just like, I don't even think I would take the points for them in this one. Maybe that's a little bit overreacting to how bad they've played, but this game looked better 3 weeks ago than it does now. And hopefully the pieces you have left in your fantasy lineup are Josh Allen and James Cook. And then outside of that, you're just hoping and praying.
And they're not. So I am smiling very hard right now. It's Brian Thomas for me. which I mean has been
at least he's
very
been
fine so far. Fine is a great way to put it. It's just been fine.
absolutely very fine, very mid. Let's
Yeah.
let's get with the 2024 terms. He's been very mid,
Yes.
but that's been good. Mid's been good for the
Mid
Jaguars.
has been good. I mean, at flex, at tight end, at wide receiver at this point, like fine's been good. But no, I'm with you. Like, I don't think I would even take Jacksonville on the points right now. And tip of the cap to Josh Allen for going in there with a bunch of unknown who's going to be your target at wide receiver, being like, I've still got my 2 tight ends that maybe aren't, blowing the roof off, but they're doing fine. And I've got James Cook standing next to me, and it's us against the world, and we're going to go out there and win games. And that's what they've done. They've just executed so far. And Jacksonville has not, despite having, I would argue, better weapons than Buffalo does as a whole. I mean, James Cook's probably the best player on the field outside of Josh Allen, but Travis Etienne's no slouch. And then their wide receiver room is probably deeper than Buffalo's. And you're sitting here saying Buffalo is a much better team, which is actually crazy to think about.
Definitely. I do still think the Cardinals should have beat them in week 1, but let's see how they bounce back in week 2. Why don't you talk a little bit about this Commanders Bengals game?
The Commanders obviously won last week in an ugly game against the New York Giants, but they didn't score a single touchdown. All those field goals. And Cincinnati, who we were very worried about after week 1, got an extra week with Jamar Chase working with Joe Burrow. We got Joe Burrow back from the injury now a couple games in. They looked better against Kansas City. Obviously, probably should have won. Questionable pass interference call. However it happened, they lost. But they look like they're starting to find a groove, and they're a team that always starts slow. I think Cincinnati is going to handle business in this one. 7.5 is a big spread. I think it was actually the biggest spread of the week. But I think that that's still a fair line for Cincinnati, and I don't think I would take the points in this one either.
Yeah, I mean, Cincinnati's been, very interesting, tough start to the season. The guy I'm super interested in has potential not flex play, but tight end streamer is Mike Gesicki. He's been getting more targets. He's been getting more involved. And that's a name I'm going to watch if, heck, I might drop Strange and play Gesicki this week if I can in our league of record just to get ahead of the curve on him.
There's actually a couple of leagues that, whether I had like a weird tight end situation and was adding a second, which I usually don't do, or I think I do have one league where I'm actually starting Gesicki, where I'm struggling because I saw all the targets. The thing that concerns me with him, and obviously we'll see how it goes here in this game, T. Higgins is back. So there's going to be some targets taken away in that case. But Cincinnati's been trying to find a tight end that can kind of take some of that red zone work for a few years now. And it seems like Gesicki is that guy that fits their vision of that. And maybe it will never come around, and him and Burrow will never quite get on the same page enough to have him be that dynamic touchdown threat. But they're at least trying, and that's worth a lot right now.
Definitely. And I was going to mention the T. Higgins. Don't forget he's returning, and I'm very excited to see how this offense looks. It might not be this week just because it is his first game back. He wouldn't be surprised if he's on a little bit of a snap count. But getting their 2 stud wide receivers, they have Gesicki in the middle. They got Zach Moss and Chase Brown. Like, I think this Bengals team can start to get a little bit on a roll. 2 things before we get out of here.
Okay.
Also, Brock Purdy banged up, back day to day, which day to day sounds good, but backs are always scary because you never know when they can flare up, lock up. So that's something to monitor.
Backs linger just as bad as hamstrings do.
Yep. And we're going to do one last question, and I love it. We're going to talk Dynasty, which I don't feel like we do enough during the season. But Rams House 99 says he's in a Dynasty half-point PPR super flex.
Okay.
He's a contender. He won the league last year. Should he trade a late first and Javonte for Brian Robinson and a third? Or is that, you think B-Rob is Brian Robinson or Bijan?
I would guess Bijan.
I'm thinking Bijan because he's giving up a first.
Yeah. And if you
because when I first read it as Brian Robinson, I was like, there's no way.
I mean, no. Bijan, that makes that a very interesting pick. And the fact that you basically have the power to go out there and grab Bijan Robinson to add to a, league winning team from the previous year, I'd go out there and do it. Javonte Williams has been on a slippery slope for a while. While he might be a decent asset for you to kind of fill a flex spot in a redraft, he's not somebody I'm trying to put a lot of stock into in Dynasty. But Bijan Robinson is somebody that I want as many stocks of as I can. He looks fantastic. It is Brian Robinson.
It is Brian.
Okay. Rewind here. I still like Brian Robinson better than Javonte.
I don't know.
And when you look at it, late first round pick, obviously not as valuable as most teams when they're making this trade. They're maybe a borderline playoff team, be mid to early first round pick. This is very questionable for me. I'm interested to hear you say first.
Yeah, for me, and maybe I might overvalue first round picks, because if I'm thinking about it, like, who at pick 12 or pick 10 is going to make an impact like a Brian Robinson could. Like, a lot of times in Dynasty, it's that first 5 to 7, and then you're just all trying to find the next surprise. So
pretty much.
I don't think there's any harm in trading a first, especially if you're going to go all in. I might, though, wait until a week or two. Like, you should have a trade deadline probably around between week 6 and week 8. I think this is kind of on the high end for a Brian Robinson. I personally would maybe start with a second and kind of go from there. You might know the guy personally. You might know your league a little bit better. First might be very tradable in your league, would be very common. But I think that I would kind of start with a second and work my way up to a first if I need him, or kind of see how this plays out. And I definitely wouldn't make this trade until the Monday night game is over. I wouldn't even submit it.
Be mine. Yeah. So I would actually go into this game hoping that Brian Robinson gets put into a negative game script. Cincinnati goes up. He doesn't get as many carries as you hope. Flip a second into that draft bit, into that trade, and be like, Brian Robinson, maybe a little bit volatile. And I mean, maybe he is, because Washington's going to be in some negative game scripts this year. And maybe you can flip that trade for a second if he has a bad game tonight. So I would wait at least until after the games tonight. But I do like the idea of maybe if he has a neutral to good game, give it a week or two. See if you can try to either get a little bit more back or give a little less.
Yeah, and for me too, like, I know you're getting a third back as well, so there is some value in that, but I'd almost use that first and, like, go get yourself a piece. Like, obviously a first isn't going to get you a Justin Jefferson, but if you could go out and get you, I know he got banged up, like a Devonta Smith, or, an upper echelon wide receiver 2, or even, a lower end wide receiver 1, could you go get yourself a Stephon Diggs? Could you go get yourself, or even an upper tier running back? Could you go get a guy that has been playing? Well, it's not going to get you Breece Hall. It's not going to get you Bijan, but could you get a Jonathan Taylor? Could you get someone of that caliber? You're not going to get the third back for them, but you're going to go all in for another run. And hopefully you do, because winning back-to-back fantasy is extremely difficult, even in Dynasty. So hopefully you do get a victory for yourself this upcoming season, because I know I'm still trying to get a Dynasty win on a 5-year rebuild that I just cannot seem to get that team together.
Man, him and I actually joined a Dynasty expansion draft the exact same year. It is tough coming into a league that's already established, but coming into a Dynasty league in general and just having to think long term while also thinking short term is a tough one. So, yeah.
All righty, George. Well, kickoff is going to happen in about 30 seconds. They are probably playing that transition. So turn over your TVs, go watch the Monday Night Football. Thanks for joining us on another edition of the Couch GMs podcast. We are live every Monday and Thursday at 6:30 podcast in your podcast feeds later that night or the next day. Thanks for joining the chat. We'd love to have more of you. Tell your friends. I'm Cody Roadcap. That's George Kerth. We will talk to you all on Thursday.